Picture this. It's September 1944, and the ancient city of Paris stands on the edge of total annihilation. Adolf Hitler has just issued one of the most devastating orders of the entire war: destroy Paris, burn it, blow up the Eiffel Tower, demolish Notre Dame, turn every bridge into rubble and every monument into dust. The Führer wants Paris reduced to a field of ruins before the Allies can claim it as their prize. The man tasked with carrying out this apocalyptic command is General Dietrich von Choltitz, the newly appointed military governor of Paris, a battle-hardened German officer known for his ruthless efficiency in destroying cities on the Eastern Front. He has the explosives, he has the men, he has the authority. And yet, in the coming hours, this career soldier will make a decision that defies every order from his supreme commander, a decision that will save one of the world's most beautiful cities and spare the lives of millions. But what could possibly make a loyal German general disobey Hitler at the height of the war? What happened in those tense, chaotic days that changed the fate of Paris forever? The answer is more complex, more human, and more dramatic than you might imagine. Stay with us, hit the subscribe button, and join us in bringing back to life the forgotten secrets of the past that the world never knew. Let's rewind just a bit to understand the stakes. By August 1944, the war has turned catastrophically against Nazi Germany. The D-Day landings 2 months earlier have been a resounding success, and Allied forces are sweeping across France with unstoppable momentum. The German army is in retreat, demoralized and disorganized. Hitler, watching his thousand-year Reich crumble from his bunker, has become increasingly erratic and vindictive. If he cannot have France, he reasons, then no one will. This scorched earth mentality has already left a trail of devastation across Eastern Europe, where Hitler ordered the complete destruction of Warsaw and other cities rather than let them fall intact into enemy hands. Now Paris, the city of light, the crown jewel of European culture and civilization, is next on his list. On August 7th, Hitler summons Dietrich von Choltitz to his headquarters at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. The general stands before the Führer, who appears increasingly unhinged, his hands trembling, his eyes wild with fury and paranoia. Hitler's orders are clear-cut. Paris must be defended to the last man, and if it cannot be held, it must be utterly destroyed. Every historical building, every cultural landmark, every bridge across the Seine must be blown up. The city that has stood for over 2,000 years must become nothing more than a smoking crater, a warning to anyone who dares defy the Third Reich. Von Choltitz arrives in Paris on August 9, 1944, and immediately begins assessing his grim assignment. He tours the city, inspecting the pre-positioned demolition charges that have been carefully placed at strategic points throughout Paris. Explosives sit beneath the Eiffel Tower, wired and ready. The Palais du Louvre, home to countless priceless works of art, has been rigged for destruction. The magnificent Cathedral of Notre Dame has charges set at its foundations. The beautiful bridges spanning the Seine, the Pont Neuf, the Pont Alexandre III, bridges that have stood for centuries, all have been prepared for demolition. Von Choltitz has approximately 22,000 troops under his command, along with 50 tanks and enough explosives to turn the heart of Paris into an apocalyptic wasteland. Everything is in place. All that remains is for him to give the order. But something unexpected begins to happen within the mind of this hardened military officer. As he walks through the streets of Paris, something inside him starts to shift. You have to understand who Dietrich von Choltitz was before this moment. This wasn't some soft-hearted officer prone to sentimentality. Born in 1894 into a Prussian military family with a long tradition of service, von Choltitz had been a soldier for most of his life. He fought in World War I as a young man, and when the Second World War erupted, he proved himself again and again as a capable and obedient commander. He participated in the invasions of Poland, the Netherlands, and France in the early years of the war. He led troops during the brutal siege of Sevastopol in Crimea, where the city was systematically destroyed. In Rotterdam, he had overseen operations that left much of the city center in flames. He knew how to destroy cities. He had done it before without hesitation. Hitler chose him specifically for the Paris assignment because of this track record. The Führer believed von Choltitz would carry out the destruction of Paris without question, just as he had followed orders in the East. But Paris is different, and von Choltitz finds himself confronting something he didn't expect: the weight of history itself. As the general moves through the city in those sweltering August days, he sees something that unsettles him deeply. Paris isn't just another strategic objective or military target. It's a living museum, a repository of Western civilization, a city that has inspired artists, writers, philosophers, and dreamers for centuries. He walks past the Louvre and thinks of the masterpieces housed within its walls. He sees Notre Dame rising majestically above the Seine, a testament to human faith and architectural genius spanning 8 centuries. He watches Parisians going about their daily lives despite the occupation, the fear, the uncertainty. Mothers with children, elderly couples, young lovers stealing moments of normalcy amid the chaos of war. And perhaps for the first time in his military career, von Choltitz begins to question the morality of his orders. Can he really be the man who erases this city from existence? Can he be responsible for destroying something that belongs not just to France, but to all of humanity? The explosives are ready, the detonators are in place, but his finger hesitates over the metaphorical trigger. Meanwhile, the situation in Paris is rapidly deteriorating. The French resistance, sensing that liberation is near, launches an uprising on August 19th. Barricades appear throughout the city as resistance fighters emerge from the shadows to take control of government buildings, police stations, and strategic intersections. For years, these men and women have waited for this moment, suffering under Nazi occupation, watching their neighbors disappear into the night, enduring humiliation and brutality. Now, with Allied forces approaching, they refuse to wait any longer. They want to liberate their own city. The streets erupt in gunfire. Von Choltitz's forces clash with the resistance fighters in running battles across Paris. The general receives frantic orders from Hitler's headquarters: crush the uprising, then destroy the city. The Führer is adamant. He calls von Choltitz repeatedly, demanding to know why Paris is still standing. Is Paris burning? Hitler screams into the telephone. Is Paris burning? But von Choltitz stalls. He offers excuses. He says he needs more time to ensure the destruction is complete. He claims he's waiting for the right moment. In reality, he's wrestling with the most consequential decision of his life. The Swedish consul general in Paris, Raoul Nordling, becomes a crucial figure in this drama. Nordling is a skilled diplomat who has spent years in Paris and loves the city deeply. He has already saved hundreds of political prisoners from deportation to German concentration camps through careful negotiation with German officials. Now, sensing von Choltitz's hesitation, Nordling approaches the general with a desperate appeal. The two men meet in secret, and Nordling speaks to von Choltitz not as a soldier, but as a man with a conscience, a father, a human being who will be judged by history. Nordling paints a vivid picture of what destruction would mean, not just the loss of buildings and monuments, but the deaths of countless innocent civilians trapped in the city. He reminds von Choltitz that the war is clearly lost, that Germany's defeat is only a matter of time. Does the general really want to be remembered as the man who destroyed Paris? Does he want his children and grandchildren to grow up bearing the shame of that act? What purpose would such destruction serve, except to satisfy Hitler's mad revenge? These conversations deeply affect von Choltitz, who has two young daughters back in Germany. What kind of world is he leaving for them? The military situation becomes increasingly precarious. General Philippe Leclerc's French 2nd Armored Division, part of the larger Allied force under General Eisenhower, is racing toward Paris. Eisenhower had initially planned to bypass Paris to avoid a costly urban battle and to prevent the logistical nightmare of feeding millions of civilians in a liberated city. But the uprising has forced his hand. He cannot leave the French resistance to be slaughtered by the Germans. Leclerc's tanks are coming, and they're coming fast. Von Choltitz knows that once Allied tanks enter the city, any chance for an organized German withdrawal will evaporate. His forces will be trapped, surrounded, and destroyed in street fighting that would devastate Paris just as surely as the demolition charges would. He's caught between Hitler's insane orders, the reality of military defeat, and his own growing conviction that destroying Paris would be an unforgivable crime against civilization. The clock is ticking. Every hour brings Leclerc's forces closer. Every hour brings new, increasingly frantic calls from Hitler's headquarters demanding to know why Paris still stands. On August 23, von Choltitz does something remarkable. He begins to actively work toward preserving Paris rather than destroying it. He orders his troops to ignore Hitler's commands to fight to the death. He starts negotiating through intermediaries with the resistance leaders for a ceasefire, trying to avoid further bloodshed. He deliberately delays the demolition orders, citing technical difficulties and tactical considerations that don't really exist. When Hitler's headquarters demands proof that Paris is being destroyed, von Choltitz lies, saying the demolitions are proceeding but that complete destruction will take time. He's playing a dangerous game. If Hitler discovers the deception, von Choltitz will be arrested, tried for treason, and executed, and his family back in Germany will suffer terrible retribution. The Nazi regime is notorious for punishing the families of officers who fail or betray the Führer. But von Choltitz has crossed a line. He has decided that some things are more important than following orders, even orders from the supreme commander of the German armed forces. August 25, 1944, dawns clear and warm over Paris. Leclerc's tanks enter the city from the south, advancing through streets lined with jubilant Parisians who pour out of their homes to greet the liberators with flowers, kisses, and tears of joy. The scene is chaotic and beautiful, a city celebrating its freedom after 4 years of occupation. Von Choltitz, watching from his headquarters in the Hôtel Meurice on the Rue de Rivoli, knows the end has come. German resistance throughout the city is collapsing. His troops are surrendering or fleeing. The demolition charges remain in place, still wired, still ready. Even now, in these final hours, he could give the order. He could press the button and fulfill Hitler's command. The explosives would tear through Paris like a hurricane of fire and steel, bringing down monuments that have stood for centuries, killing thousands of civilians, and leaving the city a burning ruin. But von Choltitz doesn't give that order. When French forces arrive at the Hôtel Meurice, they find the general waiting calmly in his office, resigned to surrender. He signs the surrender document, officially turning over Paris to the Free French forces. No demolitions have been carried out. The Eiffel Tower still stands, elegant and proud against the summer sky. Notre Dame's bells ring out in celebration. The bridges across the Seine remain intact, soon to be filled with celebrating crowds. Paris survives. But here's where the story gets even more interesting, because the question of why von Choltitz made this decision has been debated by historians for decades. After the war, von Choltitz wrote a memoir called Is Paris Burning?, in which he portrayed himself as a hero who saved Paris from destruction out of humanitarian concern and love for civilization. He became something of a celebrated figure in France, with many Parisians viewing him as the man who spared their city. But the truth, as historians have discovered, is more complicated and perhaps more fascinating than the simple hero narrative. Von Choltitz wasn't just a noble man defying an evil tyrant out of pure conscience, though that certainly played a role. He was also a pragmatic military officer who understood that Germany had lost the war, and that carrying out Hitler's order would serve no military purpose while ensuring his place in history as a monster on par with those who destroyed the ancient library of Alexandria or who razed great cities in antiquity. He was influenced by Raoul Nordling's appeals, yes, but also by the simple calculation that destroying Paris would not change the outcome of the war, and would only add to his personal guilt and the collective guilt of the German people. The Nazi regime is notorious for punishing the families of officers who fail or betray the Führer. But von Choltitz has crossed a line. He has decided that some things are more important than following orders, even orders from the supreme commander of the German armed forces. August 25, 1944, dawns clear and warm over Paris. Leclerc's tanks enter the city from the south, advancing through streets lined with jubilant Parisians who pour out of their homes to greet the liberators with flowers, kisses, and tears of joy. The scene is chaotic and beautiful. A city celebrating its freedom after 4 years of occupation. Von Choltitz, watching from his headquarters in the Hôtel Meurice on the Rue de Rivoli, knows the end has come. German resistance throughout the city is collapsing. His troops are surrendering or fleeing. The demolition charges remain in place, still wired, still ready. Even now, in these final hours, he could give the order. He could press the button and fulfill Hitler's command. The explosives would tear through Paris like a hurricane of fire and steel, bringing down monuments that have stood for centuries, killing thousands of civilians, and leaving the city a burning ruin. But von Choltitz doesn't give that order. When French forces arrive at the Hôtel Meurice, they find the general waiting calmly in his office, resigned to surrender. He signs the surrender document, officially turning over Paris to the Free French forces. No demolitions have been carried out. The Eiffel Tower still stands, elegant and proud against the summer sky. Notre Dame's bells ring out in celebration. The bridges across the Seine remain intact, soon to be filled with celebrating crowds. Paris survives. But here's where the story gets even more interesting, because the question of why von Choltitz made this decision has been debated by historians for decades. After the war, von Choltitz wrote a memoir called Is Paris Burning?, in which he portrayed himself as a hero who saved Paris from destruction out of humanitarian concern and love for civilization. He became something of a celebrated figure in France, with many Parisians viewing him as the man who spared their city. But the truth, as historians have discovered, is more complicated and perhaps more fascinating than the simple hero narrative. Von Choltitz wasn't just a noble man defying an evil tyrant out of pure conscience, though that certainly played a role. He was also a pragmatic military officer who understood that Germany had lost the war and that carrying out Hitler's order would serve no military purpose while ensuring his own place in history as a monster on par with those who destroyed the ancient library of Alexandria or who razed great cities in antiquity. He was influenced by Raoul Nordling's appeals, yes, but also by the simple calculation that destroying Paris would not change the outcome of the war and would only add to his personal guilt and the collective guilt of the German people. Moreover, historians have pointed out that von Choltitz didn't have the full capacity to completely destroy Paris even if he had wanted to. The explosives in place were substantial, but not enough to level the entire city. Many German troops under his command were exhausted, demoralized, and frankly not interested in dying for a lost cause in the final days of the war. Some of his subordinate officers had already begun to ignore orders and prepare for surrender. The rapidly advancing Allied forces meant that any attempt to systematically destroy Paris would have been interrupted before completion, likely resulting in von Choltitz's capture or death before the job was finished. So his decision wasn't made in a vacuum. It was influenced by military reality, personal morality, diplomatic pressure, and the calculations of a career officer trying to survive the end of a losing war. Does this make his decision less significant? Not at all. Whatever his mixed motivations, von Choltitz made a choice that saved countless lives and preserved irreplaceable cultural heritage. He had the power to cause tremendous destruction, and he chose not to use it. In a war characterized by almost unimaginable brutality and destruction, that decision matters. The preservation of Paris had enormous significance beyond just saving buildings and lives, crucial as those things are. Paris became a powerful symbol in the final year of the war. Its liberation intact showed that despite everything, despite years of occupation, despite Hitler's mad orders, despite the machinery of war grinding across Europe, some things could still be saved, some beauty could still survive. The photographs of Leclerc's tanks rolling through the Arc de Triomphe, of de Gaulle striding down the Champs-Élysées amid jubilant crowds, of the city celebrating its freedom with its monuments still standing, these images gave hope to people across the world that civilization itself might survive this terrible conflict. If Paris could be saved, perhaps other things could be saved too. Perhaps not everything had to be destroyed. Perhaps there could be rebuilding and renewal rather than just endless devastation. The city's survival was a psychological victory at a moment when such victories were desperately needed. Consider what would have been lost if von Choltitz had obeyed his orders. The Eiffel Tower, built for the 1889 World's Fair and now one of the most recognizable structures on Earth, would have been reduced to twisted metal. Notre Dame Cathedral, constructed over nearly 2 centuries from 1163 to 1345, a masterpiece of Gothic architecture that inspired Victor Hugo's famous novel and countless artists across the ages, would have been blown into rubble. The Louvre Museum, home to the Mona Lisa, the Venus de Milo, the Winged Victory of Samothrace, and thousands of other priceless works representing human artistic achievement across millennia, could have been severely damaged or destroyed, despite efforts to evacuate many treasures. The beautiful bridges of Paris, the Pont Neuf, the oldest standing bridge across the Seine, completed in 1607, the ornate Pont Alexandre III with its stunning Art Nouveau lamps and sculptures, all would have been dropped into the river. Montmartre, the artists' quarter that was home to Picasso, Van Gogh, Renoir, and so many others, could have been shelled into oblivion. The Latin Quarter, the intellectual heart of Paris, with its universities and bookshops stretching back to the Middle Ages, might have burned. The loss would have been incalculable, not just to France, but to all of humanity. And the human cost would have been staggering. In August 1944, Paris had a population of approximately 2.5 million people. While some had fled or been deported during the occupation, the vast majority remained in the city, trapped by circumstances, age, poverty, or simply a refusal to abandon their homes. If von Choltitz had ordered the systematic destruction of Paris, the death toll among civilians could easily have reached tens of thousands or more. The demolition of bridges would have prevented escape. The destruction of key buildings would have triggered fires that would have spread through densely packed neighborhoods. The fighting between German forces determined to destroy the city and Allied forces trying to save it would have turned Paris into another Stalingrad or Warsaw, cities where urban combat claimed hundreds of thousands of civilian lives. The humanitarian catastrophe would have been almost unimaginable. Children, elderly people, families hiding in their apartments, people caught in the streets, all would have been victims of Hitler's vengeful rage. Von Choltitz's decision not to destroy Paris literally saved lives numbered in the tens or hundreds of thousands. There's also a fascinating counterpoint to consider. Just a year earlier, in 1943, Hitler had ordered the complete destruction of Warsaw after the uprising there. The German forces under SS command systematically demolished the Polish capital, blowing up or burning approximately 85% of the city's buildings. The beautiful old town, the royal castle, churches, schools, homes, all were methodically destroyed in an act of pure vengeance against the Polish people. The contrast between what happened to Warsaw and what didn't happen to Paris is stark and painful. Why was Warsaw destroyed while Paris was saved? Partly it was timing. By August 1944, Germany's military situation was far more desperate than in 1943, and enforcing Hitler's orders had become more difficult. Partly it was geography. Paris was about to fall to overwhelming Allied forces, while Warsaw was brutally pacified before Soviet troops arrived. And partly it was about the individuals involved. The German commanders in Warsaw were true believers in Nazi ideology who carried out the destruction with terrible efficiency. Von Choltitz, despite his military record, found himself unable to do the same thing to Paris. The destruction of Warsaw shows us what would have happened to Paris if von Choltitz had been a different kind of man, or if circumstances had been slightly different. It's a chilling thought. In the aftermath of the liberation, von Choltitz became a prisoner of war and was held by the Allies until 1947. During his captivity, he cooperated with interrogators and historians, providing information about German military operations. After his release, he returned to Germany and lived a relatively quiet life until his death in 1966. His memoir, which portrayed him as the savior of Paris, made him a controversial figure in Germany, where some viewed him as a traitor who disobeyed orders, while others saw him as a man who did the right thing in impossible circumstances. In France, he was generally regarded more positively, though historians have continued to debate the full truth of his motivations and actions. What's undeniable is that his decision had consequences that rippled far beyond that moment in August 1944. Paris survived not just physically, but symbolically. It remained a beacon of culture, art, and human achievement, a reminder that even in the darkest times, when madness and destruction seem unstoppable, individual choices still matter. The story of von Choltitz and Paris offers us something profound to consider about leadership, morality, and the weight of individual decisions. Here was a man who spent his entire career following orders, who fought in brutal campaigns across Europe, who had participated in the destruction of other cities without apparent moral qualms. Yet when faced with the order to destroy Paris, something in him rebelled. Maybe it was the beauty of the city itself that moved him. Maybe it was the conversations with Raoul Nordling that awakened his conscience. Maybe it was the pragmatic calculation that the war was lost and that history would judge him harshly if he destroyed Paris for no military gain. Maybe it was thinking about his own daughters and the world they would inherit. Most likely, it was all of these things together, a complex mixture of motivations that we can't fully untangle decades later. But whatever the exact combination of factors, von Choltitz made a choice that ran counter to everything his training and his career had conditioned him to do. He disobeyed a direct order from Hitler himself, putting his own life at risk and potentially endangering his family. And that decision saved one of the world's great cities. This brings us to a larger question that resonates far beyond World War II. What do we do when we're given orders that we know are wrong? Von Choltitz was part of a military system that demanded absolute obedience. The Nazi regime built its power on the principle that subordinates must never question their superiors, that orders must be carried out without hesitation or moral consideration. This system enabled the Holocaust, the widespread atrocities across occupied Europe, and the deaths of millions. Yet even within that system, individuals still had choices. Von Choltitz could have followed his orders and destroyed Paris. Many German officers would have done exactly that, justifying it as military necessity or simply as following commands. But he didn't. In that moment, he chose to think for himself, to consider the human and historical consequences of his actions, and to refuse an order he found unconscionable. His decision illustrates something essential. Even in the most rigid hierarchies, even under threat of death, individuals retain their moral agency. We are never just cogs in a machine, never just following orders without responsibility for our actions. The choices we make matter, sometimes more than we can possibly know at the time. As we reflect on this story today, standing here in 2024, Paris continues to thrive as one of the world's great cities. Millions of tourists visit each year to see the Eiffel Tower, to walk through the Louvre, to admire Notre Dame, which suffered a devastating fire in 2019 but is being carefully restored and will rise again, just as the city has risen from other challenges throughout its long history. The bridges von Choltitz didn't destroy still carry Parisians and visitors across the Seine. The cafes where Hemingway and Fitzgerald once wrote still serve coffee and wine. The streets where the resistance fought for freedom are now peaceful, filled with the everyday business of life in a vibrant modern city. None of this would exist if one man had made a different choice in August 1944. When you visit Paris, you're walking through a city that survived not just through luck or accident, but because at a crucial moment, someone with the power to destroy it decided not to. That's a humbling thought. It reminds us that history isn't just about massive, impersonal forces and inevitable trends. It's also about individual human beings making choices in moments of crisis. The story of how a single decision saved Paris is ultimately a story of hope. Hope that even in the darkest times, humanity can prevail, that beauty can survive, that individuals can choose conscience over obedience, mercy over destruction. In a war that killed somewhere between 70 and 85 million people, that destroyed countless cities and left Europe in ruins, the survival of Paris stands as a small but significant victory for the better angels of human nature. It reminds us that we're not helpless in the face of evil, that resisting unjust orders is possible even when it seems impossible, and that the choices we make today will echo through history in ways we might never fully understand. Von Choltitz wasn't a perfect man. He was complicit in the Nazi war machine and participated in atrocities on the Eastern Front. But when it mattered most, when he had the chance to add one more terrible crime to history's ledger, he chose differently. And a city survived because of it. So the next time you see a photograph of the Eiffel Tower gleaming in the sunlight, or an image of Notre Dame's towers rising above the Seine, or a painting of a Parisian cafe terrace filled with people enjoying life, remember that all of it nearly disappeared in August 1944. Remember that explosive charges were wired and ready, that a madman in a bunker ordered total destruction, and that one man's decision to disobey that order saved it all. History turned on that choice, just as it has turned on countless other individual decisions, some leading to tragedy and others to salvation. The liberation of Paris wasn't just a military victory, it was a moral one, a reminder that even in the machinery of war, human compassion and historical consciousness can still assert themselves. And if you found this story as fascinating as I did diving into the research, if you're intrigued by these moments in history where individual choices shaped the world we inherited, then stick around for more deep dives into the decisions, the people, and the events that made World War II such a pivotal moment in human history. There are so many more stories like this, stories of courage, complexity, and consequences that still resonate today. Drop a comment below if there's a particular decision, battle, or person from the war you'd like to explore. And let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, remember that history isn't just something that happened to people long ago. It's the accumulated weight of millions of individual choices, and the choices we make today are tomorrow's history.